Dr. Sarah Oreck, thank you so much for coming over today. I'm actually super excited to be talking about the fourth trimester, especially since I just had a baby and I'm going through it. And you're the pro at this, you're the expert. For those who don't know who you are, can you just explain and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me in your beautiful home. I'm Dr. Sarah Oreck. I'm a reproductive psychiatrist. I have a private practice in Los Angeles. I'm part of the Parallel Panel, and I'm also a mother of two.
And I noticed that one of your son's name is Teo.
yes, it's Mateo, but it's also Teo.
Mateo.
Maybe it's going to be the name of the year.
Yeah. So can you explain what matrescence is?
Yes.
I've never heard of that word before.
I know. So yeah, matrescence is a term you probably haven't heard. It was coined in the 70s by an anthropologist named Dana Raphael to really try to capture what it is that this transition is, because it's like adolescence, and it really comes from that. And when we think about it, matrescence, like adolescence, has one of the biggest changes in hormones, sort of emotional changes, physical changes that occur in a woman's life. And I think it's honoring those shifts that happen personally, but also the shifts that happen in relationships, right? In our relationship to the world, to our work, to our partners. And so I do think it's a really wonderful term because it captures something, in one word, of the transition to motherhood. And I think it really highlights the impact of adolescence. And I think people can remember how awkward and challenging it was to be a teenager.
Yeah, I mean, for me, now that I'm going through that at the moment, postpartum, with psychological changes, body, postpartum, all of this, and I'm living through it. And I feel like a lot of these conversations haven't been held. I am so not familiar with it.
Yeah, I do think that even though we're moving towards the direction of people being more real about and raw about motherhood, which I think is wonderful, there's still something missing about the full picture. And I think we still have some idealization of what motherhood is, or some blissful idea of what mothers should be like. And I think matrescence really highlights that, yes, there are some great highs, but there's also some challenges, from self-identity to sort of our relationship with the world.
I'm glad you were talking about, you mentioned self-identity, because I think that's something that I struggle with, and I've been struggling even before I was pregnant. So I want to talk about self-identity and motherhood. Why is it that we feel these identity shifts as we become a mom?
So, what's interesting that you just said that the self-identity and struggling before is that actually we have this notion that our self-identity should somehow be very fixed. But this, we're transitioning and maturing and changing throughout our entire lives. And I think motherhood is sort of that on steroids. So I do think that there are so many hormonal changes which do impact, and actually your brain changes during pregnancy. So different parts of your brain grow in order to be able to communicate non-verbally with your child. And so literally your brain has changed. So of course there's going to be huge shifts in who you are and sort of how you navigate the world.
I think the other thing is, for me at least, and I'm sure for other moms as well, is kind of adjusting to the being a new mom, having a new routine, or the lack of having a routine, the independence, all of that. And I think I kind of went through a mourning stage of, oh my gosh, I don't know who I am. I am a mom, but I'm am I just a mom? I have a career, it's kind of on hold. Is that normal?
Absolutely. And just think about all the pieces of your life that kind of have to be on hold while you have a baby, right? Travel, and also because of the pandemic, travel, friendships, hobbies, work. And I think a lot of us, especially working moms, before having children, maybe based a lot of identity around work. And so it does become very difficult when, for the first time, you're taking a break.
Yeah, and the other thing for me was, because I was exclusively breastfeeding, and in the beginning when I was just breastfeeding before pumping, I really, really felt oh my gosh, this is all I do. Literally, this is all I do. I remember when I was talking to my midwife, she was like, yeah, for the first 15 to 20 days, you're gonna stay in bed. And I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have so much time. It's gonna be relaxing after I have a baby. I'm gonna download movies. We're gonna we had our laptop.
Do everything you haven't done.
Yeah,
right?
And Jacopo, my partner, and I are we're gonna just watch all these movies in bed. And it was no.
Not
when
gonna
she
happen.
said 5 days in bed, 5 days around your bed, and then 5 days in your room. It was literally like I was tied to my bed, and I'm like, okay, like, what's the point of me wearing a robe? Like, I'm just gonna be
yes,
naked.
good for you.
Take it.
But even right, even that, right? Our autonomy, our bodily autonomy changes,
Yeah.
right? Our body is no longer just our own. We're feeding a baby, so of course, right? Even just in that sense, or during pregnancy, your body's not your own. You're sharing it with someone, right? When body and autonomy of our bodies are such parts of our identity, of course, that's going to be shifted. And I love that you mentioned that it wasn't a vacation at all, because I think sometimes people imagine that maternity leave is like a vacation, but we both know that's definitely not the case.
Yeah, I think my biggest regret was not taking like a good maternity leave, because I only took a month off. And literally, I took a month off from, I think it happens to people who are like self-employed,
Yes.
but I only took a month off. And also, by the next week after I gave birth, like within the first week, I was still answering emails. Like, not me physically, but my boyfriend would be like showing me things like, okay, these are pressing things. And I feel like I'm mourning that stage that I didn't really like listen to my body, or like really took the time off. And I think it's something that has to do with society, where like we're always like hustling and always working, and you don't want to be behind. So I feel like, I don't know if like, do other women feel this way, or is that just me?
Absolutely, and I love how honest and raw you are about the fact that you did do some work, right? I think that there is this idealization of honoring that time, but like the realities are realities, right? You are self-employed, or you have a business, and if you stop working, who's going to do it?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's really hard, and it speaks to bigger societal issues, right? Of not having great parental leave in this country, and things that I think we really need to work on as a society to help make it sort of a better time for new parents.
Yeah.
Or even right, how expensive and exorbitant childcare is. But I agree, and I don't know if it's very American. You have your partner is European. I wonder what he thought about this. But I do think that, you know, there's all these memes of like how Europeans say I'm off, and Americans are like, I'm dialing, you know, I'm emailing you from my hospital room while I get a kidney transplant or something. There is something about sort of how much we work that I do think is something we have to look at.
Yeah.
But you know, I wonder if there's this notion of girl boss, or things that sort of also make us think that we can't do both, or if we're not tunnel vision on business, that somehow things won't succeed.
I think after I had a baby, for me, the biggest change I've seen in myself was like mentally, like not everything is so important. Like everything I used to be like, oh my gosh, I have to send that email at 2 a.m. because Europe is already up. Like, or like, oh my gosh, I'm like freaking out. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're not saving lives. I could chill.
But even if you were, right, there has to be some space
Yeah.
for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really good example of how some growth in matrescence, right, has really been for the better for you, of sort of being like, you know what, that email's not that important.
And this is also something that I had to go through, was like body image, postpartum body image. And especially because I was breastfeeding, and everybody said, once you breastfeed, like you start losing weight and you're gonna get your body back immediately. And I'm like,
I don't know who that happens to.
Like, my body held on to like all the weight. And
Well, you need an increased caloric intake.
yeah, like
in
I was
order
just
to
constantly
sustain it.
hungry,
Yep.
constantly hungry.
Yep.
I did not feel pretty or beautiful. And in the beginning stages, actually, I felt really sad because I had so many photos of Jacopo and the baby, my partner and the baby. I had 0 photos of the baby and like myself, because I just didn't feel pretty.
That's not so uncommon, and I hear a lot of people, or people saying they missed the, you know, the hospital photo with the baby in the arms, because simply they just didn't feel like, you know, they wanted to be, you know, on in a picture because of all these body changes. But see, this is the sort of similarities to being a teenager, right? It's those same like people who aren't used to having larger breasts than having it, and that can be really difficult for some people. Skin changes, hair changes, and I do think it can really impact self-identity, especially when your job has to do with how you look.
And so do you have any like tips on like how you can feel more comfortable in like your new body, your postpartum body?
I think it's always remembering what it's done, right? Your body has literally held a baby, and you birthed a baby. And that is such a tremendous feat. And then in breastfeeding, you've been feeding your baby exclusively. And I think stepping back and sort of thinking about how incredible that is, but I think as a society, we also have to kind of think about, well, our bodies age and our bodies change. How can we be more accepting and tolerant of that?
Like I just posted a bikini photo with like Teo in my arms, and if I think about like myself even like 2 years ago, I would have never posted. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have like a little pooch, or like I would be so harsh on myself. But now I'm like, I don't care, I just birthed this human being. But then again, sometimes like I'll get those comments like, oh my gosh, now you have a mom bod. I'm like, yeah, of course I have a mom bod. I had a kid. I'm a mom.
It's so interesting that you bring that up, because I've been thinking about dad bod, and when people say that, it almost feels like cute. And for mom bod, it's almost like, well, there's mommy makeovers. Like that's the thing people do. And again, nothing against cosmetic surgery. If it's something that you're thoughtful about, you know your motivations for it, all power to you. But I do think that there is a real pressure for women to bounce back or to look a certain way. And I love that you're challenging that, because who says that having a 20-year-old body that hasn't birthed a child is sort of the best, right? But I think we have this hierarchy of what we should look like.
I mean, because even for myself, like I already know all of this. But sometimes I go through that like negative mental space where like I'm harsh on my body, like my body image. And then I always have to remind myself like, oh my gosh, I birthed a human being, like literally came out of my vagina.
Yes.
Insane.
Like that's a magical power.
Yeah, and I'm like, wow, this baby is 50% me and 50% my partner who I love so much. And I'm like always just like reminding myself like, this is not how I would want him to feel about his own body. So like I always have to be like, okay, Aimee, like wake up.
Yeah,
like,
so being kind to yourself, but it's also okay to acknowledge the loss and the grief of, I don't know, the perky breasts or whatever was different. And I think acknowledging it and working through it is important, because I think people that have been to therapy know that sort of pushing it down or pretending like, oh, it's great, my body's awesome, right? Nothing's wrong, can be a little problematic, and it doesn't really mean working through it. But I think what you're experiencing of like, I'm not so happy, I don't know if I want to, and then sort of jumping back and be like, you know what, I'm really grateful for this body and what it's given me and how it was able to carry my child.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I'm like still like, I'm like now back in my workout routine. I'm like, I'm gonna be like super strong and fit. So
listen, and that's all great. Exercise is fantastic for mental health. I think it's just sort of figuring out, is it going too far? What are the motivations for it? Is it sort of more internal? And just being mindful about what's happening. But all power to the people that want to do the intense exercise or get on some kind of regimen. But I think it's as long as we're thoughtful about it and what the pressures are and motivations are.
Yeah. I mean, we touched upon like how we can navigate like these identity shifts. How do we still like feel like ourselves, like who we are to the core in our new role as a mom?
So it's partly like integrating mother as part of this core, but it can be really difficult, especially when you have a newborn and your life completely changes. I mean, for you get to travel to exotic places. I'm sure you weren't traveling so much when your baby was very young. And I think slowly integrating those things that you felt or you did with your partner and really made you feel like a couple or like yourself is super important. It can be very difficult when you feel like you don't have people you trust to stay with the baby, but as you're building those support systems, venturing out of the house, if that feels a little bit too scary, then just going to another room and leaving the baby with someone else can be really nice steps to kind of trying to find your independence. And I really think going back to things that you really enjoyed, so like a yoga class or whatever it is that sort of got you going, or times with friends can be so impactful, especially friends that might be going through similar life transitions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point that you bring up, because when I was just only with Teo, like inside the house, like not really leaving the house, I kind of felt like I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know who I am. I feel a little depressed. But then again, I don't know if it was like postpartum depression or just like the fact that I was just not seeing anybody. But at the same time, I felt like I didn't have time to be depressed, because like, oh my God, I want to feel sad, but I can't. Okay, I have to like take care of this baby.
But that's a signal, right? You need more support. right? And getting out and figuring out how that support works. That's been so hard during the pandemic. You're not alone in navigating this. Childcare is so difficult. Friends are doing other things. But I do think it's important to accept help. I know I personally, and I'm sure for you, sometimes someone offers, oh, can I send you food? And you're like, no, reflexively say no. So instead sort of say yes. Say yes to someone coming over and doing your laundry, as kind of odd as that may be. Sort of those acts of service can be really impactful. And I do think when you're starting to feel like you might be sort of going into a negative space, especially postpartum, we'll talk more about what those things can be. But I do think that's a signal of like, maybe I need a little bit more support.
So Dr. Oreck, for somebody who doesn't have the means to have a lot of help, what are your suggestions?
I mean, this is so common now. Childcare here in the US is so unaffordable. So I think it's really important to think about, first of all, these are some systemic issues that we should all be working on to kind of try to change, for parental leave, for universal childcare, more affordable access to things. But while we don't do that or don't have that, I think what we can do that's really small is brushing your teeth, right? Taking a shower, noticing what you feel like when you're in the shower, really being mindful during those moments. Even something small, and as a new mom, you probably know this, even getting out of the sweats or the pajamas for the day can make you feel like yourself again. So those small little gestures, I think, can go a longer way than we think.
Yeah, I love those tips. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom.
Thank you so much for sharing.
You guys tune in for part 2.